Hi guys, welcome back. So, I know it's been a while since the BACP updated the ethical framework, but there's a new one coming this year. There's a new one coming this year. And on the 18th of November in 2025, they had an online event talking about what we can expect in the new ethical framework. So, I'm here to share it with you and summarize what you can expect. So, grab your tea because I've got the tea. Of course, when they do launch the new one, I will definitely make a video breaking it down, speaking about it, so that we can all be in line and get to know what it do. So I wrote my notes. I got them here with me. I'll be looking at them. So the main questions that I wrote down the answers to is why is there a new ethical framework? What are some of the new changes that we can expect in the ethical framework? What support is going to be provided for therapists who have received a formal complaint? Mhm. How is the new ethical framework structured? And what can the BACP do to support implementation of the new ethical framework? And then a few extra bits of information, which I'll start with before I start explaining what I got from the conference. So, starting with the extra information, because it doesn't really fit those categories, one thing to note is that the new ethical framework was the work of 4 people. Unfortunately, I didn't get their names, but if I do manage to find out, I'll put them on the screen if you want to research them. The ethical framework this time around also considered international working, especially because of COVID and having to work from home. So it does consider UK and international laws as well in terms of working internationally to make sure that everything is legal and ethical. And this is not a random point per se, but a lot of the ethical framework was influenced by a lot of changes surrounding AI. So there's definitely a lot of that to expect. So let's get into it. So one of the first questions that they spoke about is why is there a new ethical framework in the first place? The last ethical framework was done in 2018, so it's been almost 10 years. It's been 8 years since the last one. So a lot has changed obviously in 8 years, and obviously COVID and the pandemic, we all know we don't need much explanation around that. So since COVID happened, obviously there's been a lot of changes around working online, working remotely, whichever way you say it, expansion of AI usage just all around in everyday life, in professionalism and in work and so many different areas of our lives. So they've also considered that. And the reason that they made the ethical framework was to reflect the impact of AI on how we work and how we live in the world. And they felt that they really needed to incorporate the impact of AI into the new ethical framework. So that's part of the reason why they created the new ethical framework. So, second reason that they created the new ethical framework is that they conducted a lot of research, they conducted a lot of surveys, and if you're on the mailing list, you'll know that they do send out surveys quite frequently. They sent out lots of questionnaires, they did consultations, and they also did further research, especially on AI, because a lot of people were asking about it. They did around 24 data sets and 20 different reports. Like, they put in work, okay? They put in work. You gotta give them that. Like, they put in work for this, okay? So that's been in the works, and that's how they managed to come up with this new ethical framework with a combination of all of those different things: surveys, questionnaires, consultations, interviews, you name it, they did it. And they got 20 different reports and 24 data sets from a mass of people, including further research on AI specifically, because so many people were inquiring about it and trying to understand it. So, reason number three that they're releasing a new ethical framework is because in 2019, they did a study. So, it would have been just a year after they had just released the previous ethical framework. They did a study on the usability and accessibility of that current framework that they have right now. Things like the written words, the language, the readability, and so on and so forth. And from that, there was a lot, I guess, of feedback that they got in terms of maybe it wasn't as good. So they've improved based on people's feedback from 2019 as well. And reason number four as to why there's a new ethical framework is so that clients can actually understand it too, not just therapists. So essentially, if your clients want to read it, or if the general public want to understand more about therapy before they start therapy, or maybe if a client is considering like whether they should make a formal complaint, they can read the ethical framework and actually understand it. And it's not just therapeutic jargon that they don't understand, but only we understand. So it's also been made new to make sure that clients also understand it and the jargon is a lot less, which I also second because I've been reading it sometimes and I'm like, what word is this, like what word is this? Yeah, so I get it, and I'm with it. So moving on to the second thing that they spoke about, And I'm not saying this is all they spoke about. This is just the stuff I found interesting enough to write down and relevant enough to write down because, yeah, it was a lot. So, the second thing is, what are some of the new changes within the ethical framework for 2026? So, one of the things that they kept emphasizing and going on and on and on about was it's aiming to sit inside practice and not alongside practice. What they mean by this is that it means putting the relationship front and center. Probably that might not make much sense, but from what I recall when they were explaining this over and over again, because they did a lot, is that typically what they said or kind of understood is that therapists would normally, maybe have their client sessions, work with clients, and then when they need to just check in to see something within the ethical framework, they'll just read it and just double check, like, is this okay? Did I do the right thing? Is this in line with what I'm supposed to be doing? Should I double check this? And they don't want the ethical framework to be something that you kind of just refer to once in a while when you're unsure of something or when you want to double check something, but they want it to be something that is already part of how we practice and already encompasses the way that therapists work and the way that clients experience therapy, so that you're not referring to it, but it's actually a reflection of how you're working in practice already. And so that you're sure already that, okay, what I'm doing is already in the ethical framework and it's just, clarified and clearer. So even when clients read it and they see that, okay, my therapist has the core conditions, it's already in there, and it's not something that you're having to go and check, like, am I using the core conditions? What does it say about the core conditions? So something along those lines is what they were trying to emphasize in terms of one of the new things inside the ethical framework. They had a live Q&A as well, so I think they also said that they might also be releasing a bullet pointed version of the ethical framework, so you're not having to just like read this long document. You can literally just read like a bullet pointed version of it if you need quickly to refer to something. So something that they also had an idea of doing is publishing a bullet pointed version explaining the key differences between the 2018 ethical framework and the 2026 ethical framework. So that might also be coming out around the same time if it hasn't already. But of course, if it does, I'll let you guys know. One of the other main things that are going to be different in this ethical framework is the language used, so that the readability is a lot easier, because like I said before, some of the words just threw me off, and I'm a therapist and I'm like, well, what does that mean? I had to Google some of the words in the ethical framework because I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Like, I never once heard this in my training, never once heard this in any of my lectures, never saw this in any of my textbooks. Where did you guys even find this word? Right? So, in this ethical framework, they said they made a real effort to change the language so that it is simplified. So, that's something I think we can all say we're looking forward to thoroughly, not just me. And the other thing that we can expect to see in the ethical framework is for it to be a lot clearer about the core responsibilities. Now, I regret not expanding on this note, but I think this means basically your core responsibilities as a therapist, like looking after the client, caring for the client, and all of these kinds of things, and just being ethical. So that's also something that you can expect to be something new in this ethical framework. So something else that they briefly talked about actually was the support that therapists who have received a formal complaint can expect, like the support. So that was something that I actually spoke about for a bit. And I think they said that will also be implemented in the new ethical framework. So one of the things that they said around this was that the professional conduct procedure is being improved, which is the process that a therapist has to go through if they've received a formal complaint from a client, a current client or a previous client. So they said that they're improving this process because apparently it's been very problematic and it has not been as supportive as it could be. And obviously, therapists who have been through the process have left feedback. So they said they are improving this process. I'm not 100% sure if this will be actually in the ethical framework, but I imagine it will be. And it probably should be because it makes a lot of sense for it to be in there. And something to note is that something they did mention, which I just noted down, was that the professional conduct team themselves didn't write the document, but they were consulted and their experience and expertise were used for input. Okay, so the next part of the conference talked about how the ethical framework is going to be structured. So they said that the first part of the ethical framework is going to be a lot about the relationship, discussing the therapeutic relationship between you and your client, and discussing the ethics within that relationship. So that's going to be something you're going to expect in the first part of the ethical framework. Okay, so this one, some people I think might feel like this is a bit controversial, but I think it's actually quite a good thing. So the second thing that they said that will be in there is making the practitioner first as well as the client. Because if you remember in the old ethical framework, they always said to make sure you put the client first. So in this one, they're actually emphasizing that it's important for both the practitioner to be first as well as the client, not one or the other, because, and a quote that they said, which I wrote down and I'm going to have to look at my screen while I say it, is never create a casualty in trying to save another. So the whole thing of like put on your oxygen mask before you put on someone else's. Then they went into talking a lot about self-care and blah 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 blah, because in order for you to be an effective therapist, you also need to look after yourself and take care of yourself. So that's also something that's going to be included in the structure of the new framework. Once again, another part of the structure of the new ethical framework is going to include a section on core responsibilities, which I already mentioned before, so I won't expand on that. Another thing to expect, which I think is actually quite good and very nice as well, is that they're going to name the power structures and powers that can be mirrored in the therapeutic space. So this is something that I feel like some therapists or some people are like, no, 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 we make sure there's no power imbalance in the therapeutic room, but like, is there regardless? Like, I think it's just good for us to own it and just say, listen, let's call a spade a spade. There is a power imbalance in therapy, and let's call it out. So this part is definitely going to be in there, which I think is really good to just be aware of it. And of course, we can reduce the power imbalance as much as possible, but at the end of the day, it's there. And I think it's good to acknowledge that, and to actually acknowledge it means that we can actually actively prevent it from being a bigger imbalance. And in terms of structure, again, something that I think that was in the Q&A, I think somebody mentioned that they should release the ethical framework with a different color background, like a black background or a different color background, to assist those who have accessibility issues, which I think is a really, really good idea, because I think even with apps and with our phones now, we can also switch like to dark mode, which is really nice and helpful for accessibility reasons as well. And I don't know if it was mentioned, but I think even having it in Braille would also be quite nice and helpful. But anyway, that's just my mind. And then they mentioned something as well, lastly, about graphics for the summary pages. I didn't really fully understand this because I was like, drawings? Like, we're going to have drawings in the ethical framework. I don't really get it or see the need. But if they do, I'm sure it will look good. I'm interested to see what that's all about. So, graphics for the summary pages is something that they spoke about for a little bit as well. So, that's going to be an interesting new style for the ethical framework for this year. Okay, so last but not least was, what can the BACP do to support implementation of the new ethical framework? One of the things that they really, really emphasized was that the ethical framework is not going to be a standalone document. It's going to have other supporting documents which you can use alongside the ethical framework to support you in your practice and to support you in your career. So be sure to use that and to look at it as well, especially if the ethical framework maybe isn't making complete sense, or so you have some questions. I think some of the other documents will expand on maybe certain things if you really, really need extra information on some stuff. So that's something different about this ethical framework. It's going to be other documents to support the ethical framework so that you have all the answers you need. So something else that they mentioned was that there are already over 100 good practice in action resources that are available in different formats and topics on the BACP website. So that's something to really look out for. I didn't even know about that myself, so I think I'll definitely have a look, and if I find the link, I'll put it in the description box for you guys as well. So you already have that to help you in terms of just your practice if you want to look at those as well. So something they mentioned was that there's going to be two strands. I don't know what that means, and I don't know why I didn't write extra, but they basically mentioned that there's going to be, I think, like a resource where it's split into two strands, one being ethics essentials, and then the other being ethics in practice. So, ethics essentials is going to include things like bite sized chunks of information, checklist formats for therapists, and videos explaining and summarizing different topics. So, if you want more information on a certain topic or guideline, there'll be videos for that as well. So, that's something to look out for. And then the second part, ethics in practice, there'll be written resources which are going to be redeveloped, reformed, and rebranded to reflect the relational focus of the framework. And they said that they're going to put case studies in each part of the resource. So it's going to be, I think, very, very detailed and very, very helpful. So that you're actually seeing practical and realistic ways of dealing with situations with the case studies there. So that's something to really look forward to as well. Okay, the other thing that they mentioned that's going to be supporting us in terms of implementing the new framework is a redesigned ethics hub part of the website, and they're also planning to have an ethics helpline service, which is currently in the plan and in the works. So I think that's actually quite helpful and very interesting. So I think the ethics hub probably might be ready, but if not, they'll probably come out around the same time as the ethical framework. And then also in terms of just supporting us with implementing the new framework, the one other thing that they're going to do is that they're going to continue to recruit members. I think they always have. They'll continue to recruit members to be committee members and to be part of focus groups to actually help with feedback on resources that they do put out there. So if you get emails asking you to, be part of a focus group or to be a committee member for something, it's so that we can actually provide feedback and they can then improve for the next ethical framework, or even just improve things on the website and the information that we'd like, the information we need, the information they don't provide, and so on and so forth. So if you get those emails, be on the lookout and respond. And that's also to me too. So, like I said, once a new ethical framework is released, I will definitely do a video about it, just summarizing it and going through it with you guys. So, in the meantime, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. So, once, like I said, so the second thing is, what are some new things? And another thing that they changed about, and another, so reason, and okay, so to fit, it's aiming to sit inside, practice. Oh, so the other thing is that they have an idea to publish a bullet pointed, so something that they also had an idea of doing to reflect the relational focus of the framework is the language of, and the language used.